My name is Audrey. I'm Ryan Beardsley, Associate Professor at Arizona State University, and today we are speaking with Dr. Henry Levin with Inside the Academy. It's a pleasure to honor you today and interview you about your life, your personal and professional history.
Thank you.
First of all, tell us about where you were born and where you grew up.
I was actually born physically in Brooklyn, New York, at a hospital because my uncle was a doctor there, an obstetrician, and then they took my body within a week back to New Jersey, which is really where I was brought up. So born there, but never really lived in Brooklyn.
And you were one of how many children?
One of six.
One of six children.
I have a twin.
Oh, you have a twin. Huh. And where's your twin live?
My twin lives in New Jersey.
Oh, great. Tell us about your parents.
My parents were an odd couple. My mother had a master's degree, actually from Teachers College, where I teach, had a bachelor's degree from Cornell University, and was one of 10 children. And my father was a high school graduate, and my dad had a modest furniture store in an industrial town in New Jersey. When I say modest, he had a couple of employees to deliver furniture and one to people the office. I was going to say man the office because, you know, I'm old and we use those terms. But to people the office, and it happened to be a female. And but he was one of these people he'd get up on the roof to fix it when it leaked, and he was just a jack of all trades kind of person, as opposed to a real business person. He never wore a tie or jacket or anything like that. So so they were an odd couple because he was also kind of reactionary conservative, saw communists everywhere, and my mother was very much a liberal, progressive, got to get out there and change the world and, you know, do justice, things like that. And then they had 6 children, so that kept her busy, and she also worked. So it was a pretty active household.
Did you attend public school in New Jersey?
I did.
All the way through high school?
Yes.
And how were you as a student?
I would say pretty mediocre. School wasn't for me. Let me put it another way. That didn't mean that things that we normally associate schools weren't for me. I loved to read. I loved classical music. I had my own amateur radio station and put together all kinds of electrical equipment, communications equipment, and designed antennas, things like that. So I was kind of active intellectually. But was I a good student? No, I would get in trouble. I would spend the time, for example, making satirical songs about awful teachers, and then when the teacher would go out to smoke, which was common in those days,
Sure.
teacher would step out of the class, give the class an assignment. I would get up in the front of the room. A friend of mine would get by the door to watch for the teacher, and I would read or sing the song that I had made. And then great friends, the teacher would be coming back, but the friend wouldn't say that, and I would get caught in the middle, and then I would get suspended. Or anyway, I was not a good student.
How did those experiences influence the educational scholar that you've become today?
Well, I think that they made me see some obvious things. You know, that you have to build on people's experience, you have to engage them, you have to stimulate them. To me, all children deserve enrichment, not remediation. And you can get some very, very pedestrian learning out of an excitement about and a relevant activity to my life. Whereas when you do it just for its own sake, it becomes very difficult for some of us. We don't see purpose in it. Dewey talked about purpose, that education is purpose, even though most people whom I've spoken with think that Dewey just said let kids do whatever they want. That's nonsense. He thought that all education should have purpose, but that purpose should be decided by what is good and should involve people actually getting engaged together in working on that purpose. And I kind of discovered that in my own education. For me, that that worked. So if it worked for me, maybe for other people too.
As a student, did you always have plans to go on to get an undergraduate or higher degree?
No. My father wanted me to take over this business that he had. I wasn't enthusiastic about it, but he was pretty authoritarian, and in those days I was pretty willing to comply with his wishes. My mother would whisper to me about going to Cornell and experiencing what she thought I should experience in a college education. I was an athlete, and in fact, that was the only fun part of school. And I finished third in the mile in New Jersey State Championship, and I did very well on my SATs. See, a lot of people complain about the SATs. That's actually what rescued me. Very high SAT scores, surprisingly so. I mean, surprisingly so that the college counselor at my high school said, "You're lucky they mixed up your SAT with someone else," because she looked at a B-C record in terms of grades. Although I have to say B's and C's in those days meant something quite different than they do today. But teachers would also punish you if you weren't compliant, so you could do A work, but get a B or C in those days, and you had no ability to challenge that. But on my high school at grade point average, I finished barely top third of my high school class. Now, it was a high school class that had very high college participation, but still, top third, you're not going to get into any of the top schools. But I did have very strong SATs, and so I was given an offer of a couple of scholarships. Not clear whether they were athletic or academic, given my GPA. My dad, I didn't want to disappoint my dad, and so I decided to go to business school, even though that wasn't particularly interesting to me. That was at least consistent with what he wanted. And it also meant that if I stayed close to home, I could work on Saturdays or whatever for him. So I did come to New York at that time. I came to New York University's Stern School, which wasn't called that then. It had a different name. NYU still existed. The business school still existed, but today it's called the Stern School of whatever business or something. And is much more prestigious, by the way, than when I went there. The business school was not the most prestigious school of the university by any means in those days. But that's where I went to school. I went to New York University, studied in the School of Business.
In business. You referenced your running. What many people don't know is that you were quite the runner, nationally ranked as one of the top 10 distance runners in college. Is that right?
Yes. During that year, that Olympic year when I graduated, I won't tell you which year unless you mention it.
I can do the math really fast.
But I had one of the top 10 times, not good enough to make the Olympic team because
but you
only
almost
the top
made
three.
it. You were close.
Well, I was close, but I had other challenges in my life at that time, and just couldn't possibly devote myself to the Olympics. I had dental problems, and they had to get paid for. I had to figure out. I was kind of engaged in planning a marriage, and so, a lot of things that when you don't get your priorities straight, you get a lot of things competing for your energy and talent and things like that.
How fast did you run the mile?
I wasn't a miler, actually.
Oh.
So my fastest time for the mile wasn't extraordinary, although you have to remember that this was more than 50 years ago, but it was 4:12. But I was a 3-miler, or the equivalent of a 5,000 meter today.
Wow.
5,000 meters is the event that I was ranked nationally in.
Do you still run today?
I kind of manage my way to a treadmill, and I walk some, yeah.
Walk and run?
Yeah. But more, just for health reasons.
Then you went on to get your master's and your PhD. Tell us about that.
No. Then I had to get a job, of course, so I started off with my dad. We recognized pretty quickly that that was probably not going to work out well because he completely obliterated that I could have learned anything in college that would be useful in his business. Remember, he had been doing this at that time, for 40 years. And his view was, if I work with him or really work for him, I do what he tells me to do, and I have no ideas or anything like that. Because how could you have any ideas if you haven't worked in this business? And I've been head of this business for 40 years. But the good thing about it was that he recognized that after a few weeks, literally a few weeks, maybe a month, that this wasn't going to work. So I applied for another position. I really actually wanted to be a writer, but you don't just become a writer out of college. You don't just say, I want to be a writer. Let's see, where are the writing positions, And they all say, of course, experience and send samples. And my samples were only samples of academic work,
And songs about teachers.
Songs about teachers, things like that. So I got a job selling insurance. Hated it. The first thing they tell you is look through your college yearbook, think about your friends, call them and tell them that you really want to work with them in terms of helping you secure a good future for them, and you blah, 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 blah. And I felt that was insincere and that I was intruding on people's lives. So that lasted about 2 months. Then I was at wit's end what to do, and I had a friend who was the personnel manager at one of the branch stores of Saks Fifth Avenue. And so I went to her, and she hired me as a salesperson in the boys department. And I guess people saw that I was a hustler. Hustler, not in the sense of selling dope or things like that as it's used today, but hustler in the sense of having a lot of energy and listening carefully and hearing what people wanted and seeing issues in the organization. So in 1 week, I was promoted to what was called a section manager. And I was a section manager, meaning that basically what you do is you solve problems, you reallocate personnel, you meet with customers who have a lot of complaints, or there's a credit problem, which is a little embarrassing for you and the customer, but you bring them aside and say, we're happy to take a bank check. Or in those days, we didn't have credit cards, actually. At least I can't recall. Well, there were American Express cards, but not Visa or Masters. And so anyway, you had to deal with those things. I had to wear a tie and a jacket, and there are a lot of pretty girls in the store. And so it was fun. I mean, pretty girls in the flirtatious sense, not pretty girls in terms of dating them, because you really have to stay away from those kind of relationships if you want to be professional and move on. And basically during the year, I learned something about that business which I didn't like, and that is that you have to beat the figures that you got last year. What the figures, the numbers, the sales, and in every department. And if you don't, you look for what the problem is in each department with the department head. You get into some ugly stuff. At the end of the day, they would go into the manager's office, and I was invited too, and you'd pull out a couple of bottles of J&B, and everybody would drink, and they'd get loud. And I just asked myself, is this the lifestyle that I want? And I was still very oriented towards reading and discussions, and I didn't see any of that in this business. It was all success is money, success is moving up. So I started to apply to graduate schools. And I didn't know much about graduate work, to be honest. I looked at my units at NYU. I didn't want to go to business school, so I found that I had more units in economics than any other single subject. Fortunately, the NYU Business School in those days required about half of the credits in the liberal arts. So I had some background in writing and in other subjects, which was great. And I applied to 2 or 3 places in economics to get a master's degree. And as soon as I was accepted, I made the decision to get out of the retail, the rag business, or whatever you want to call it, as soon as I could. And so I started after 1 year. I worked there a year at Saks Fifth Avenue, and I was offered then to enter their executive training program to move to a higher level, and I just said, no, I'm going to do the dumb thing. I'm going to just go for a master's degree. And so then I started working the master's degree, and I had I was a very homebody type at that point, and so I went to Rutgers in New Jersey, commuted from my home, didn't have to get an apartment, and didn't have much money because I was paying for dental work and stuff all of the previous year with my earnings from Saks. So I started, and I found it difficult because it was just a different way of thinking. And I thought, when I finish the master's degree, I'm done with university, with college. I'll look for something else after that. And so the idea was just to pace myself and get finished. But I got involved in my master's dissertation. And at least in those days, they required a very substantial master's dissertation. Today, I think things have changed where the master's degree is, you give people a memo or something pretty close to it. But in those days, and it may have been because they had a very small doctoral program at Rutgers in economics. And so they saw the master's program as their main graduate program at that time. But I got into it, and I really, really enjoyed working on the dissertation. I enjoyed looking for materials, and you had to do it in the old way in those days. You had to literally look for them physically in college card catalogs and all kinds of other hands-on stuff, which, by the way, was also fun for me, because I was kind of a hands-on person with the electronics and stuff like that. And then I kind of did well enough that they offered me to come into the doctoral program. And that's what happened. I came to the doctoral program. I had a professor who was very quiet, very modest, but really emphasized very high quality work. Meeting his standards was really something. And he wasn't famous. He was well known, but he wasn't famous. And so I chose my field within economics, the field of public finance, because I wanted to work with him. And I started to work with him, and he was shocked that I did really well. It turns out that in the second year, when I was taking his course, I got mononucleosis. Don't ask me how, because I wasn't kissed enough when I was, but in those days, what you did was, there was no medicine or anything. You went to bed, and you just recovered by resting. And my sister, my twin sister, who was studying political science at Rutgers, would get me all the books on my reading list from the library. So here I was in bed all day, and I was reading, and I was absorbing. And when it came time for the finals in the course, he couldn't believe how capable I was in terms of answering the questions. Oh, it had nothing to do with intelligence. It had to do with, I really read the stuff, because I had a little time on my hands, like all day, 24 hours, So anyway, I did really, really well. And as you know, professors who see their students doing really well also want to spend some time with those students and work with them, and that's basically what happened. And so I worked with him, and by this time I was married. I had a child. It wasn't a good marriage. The child was good. That was Mia, but I had to earn money, and so when I finished up the exams and the coursework and everything, I got a job with a professor actually at New York University who was very famous in his field. He was an expert on the property tax. And he was the head of the mayor's temporary commission. This was Mayor Robert Wagner in New York City. The mayor's temporary commission for New York City finances. This was a comprehensive study of New York City finances. And my professor, Harry Kahn, got in touch with him and said, I have this guy who's kind of good, and you have an opening. I think that he would be really good for you. So I met with him, and he hired me. And he gave me a big surprise, a pleasant surprise. My salary was $10,000 for a year, which actually wasn't that bad then. And he said, he said, this is like July. All of our reports have to be done by January. I figured, wait a minute, I'm getting paid July to the following June. I said, what happens after January? He said, you'll write your damn thesis then. So basically, I saw myself with 5 free months. All I had to do was to stay with my research for my dissertation at that point and work on the project that I was assigned for this, for this Mayor's Temporary Commission for City Finances. I chose the sales tax. I worked on the employment and income effects of the sales tax. And then Dick Netzer, who was the head of the commission, this professor at NYU, really liked what I was doing, which was good, because it turns out that he and my professor were very closely connected with a lot of people in the field at good universities and think tanks and things like this. So that led to my next job. First of all, I took from February to June, July to complete the dissertation, and then applied for a number of jobs and got a lot of offers, which was surprising because Rutgers in economics was a second-tier institution. It was not a first-tier institution. By second-tier, I would say between 20th and 40th out of maybe 300 institutions that offered a PhD, but not top 20 or top 15, whatever. And there was that hierarchy but because these guys who were plugged in recommended me, I got offers from Michigan, from Brown, and from the Brookings Institution in Washington. And I thought, where do I want to be? If I'm at Brookings, Brookings, by the way, was an outpost for a lot of the intellectuals who were in the Kennedy and Johnson administration. And I knew their work and so on. So I chose Brookings on the basis that I would now have contact with a lot of different people. If I went to a university campus, might get stuck there. And I had other offers as well. My first offer was at Iowa State University, which I was really excited about because the people were so nice. The only problem is it snowed. And so I was isolated there for 3 days and realized that each day was kind of like a repetition of the last one. I heard the same stories, and I thought, this is not for this part of life for me. In the meantime, I have this marriage that I'm with the child and so on and so forth. So I went to Brookings.
Is that when you turned your interest into education?
It is.
And what inspired that?
Well, what inspired that was actually command performance. When I came to Brookings, even when I was interviewed, they said, we're forming a new division of our economics group called social economics. That will deal with education, it will deal with health, it will deal with public assistance and welfare, it will deal with a number of these social areas, which you did not have in economics in those days. And so, what do you want to do? So I felt, pick a card. Well, education seems pretty interesting. I hated mine, therefore there must be something to study there, And so I chose that. And it was an exciting time in Washington. I arrived at Brookings about 2 weeks before the Coleman Report was published and saw all the news on that, and immediately made contacts with Department of Education to talk with the researchers who had worked on that, to get data, et cetera. So it was a very exciting time.
You wrote a pretty poignant critique of the Coleman Report, is that right?
I did. I started to look, I looked at the actual data, and I also looked at the report. And I thought this report uses inappropriate analytic techniques, and it's very misleading in terms of the data and the interpretation. And then I had a new friend at Harvard, Sam Bowles, and we got together one day, and he saw the same thing. And so we decided to write an article together, which was critical of the Coleman Report. And I should tell you, we submitted it to a number of places. It was rejected by all of them, at least 4 or 5 rejections saying, well, this group of young Turks, all they want to do is take down a great man, and no other purpose than that. No, so therefore, there can't be substance in what they're saying. This is a really important report and should not be critiqued, and so on. So it also undermined some of the arguments of those who were our friends in the civil rights movement, because they were arguing that school resources make no difference, that you can't really improve schools for blacks by getting better teachers or any of that stuff. The only way you could do it is through integration, through giving them better peers. And so these were our friends. You know, it's terrible, you know, when you're loved by your enemies and hated by your friends. And I've gone through that in a number of phases of my career. But what we did is we eventually got it published in a relatively new journal, Journal of Human Resources. And as far as I understand, it's been reprinted, I think, 36 times.
Wow.
But in those days, it was not accepted.